Starting off on Unit 5, Assignment 1, we had a series of 5 different little bits of kind of internet media that we first watched. First was a YouTube video called Charlie Bit My Finger, which was not intended to go viral when it initially came out. This is a pretty famous video. It's about two little kids, two brothers, kind of playing around with each other. And at one point, the younger one, named Charlie, bites the kid or the finger of the kid who is holding him, and the second youngest kid exclaims that Charlie bit my finger, and that's like the whole joke is like it's just kind of funny and it's cute, and it became very popular at the time actually, pretty big meme. Next is this segment from the Ellen DeGeneres show called Text from Your Ex. They just go through basically a series of texts that people have gotten from their ex after breakups, and it's just kind of again meant to be like a funny thing to laugh about. And this is again a series of messages that were not intended to be publicly shared or like to become famous at all. In the original context of how they were sent to the partner that they broke up with. Obviously, once they came to the show, then it was kind of a different ordeal. Third, talked about the Ice Bucket Challenge a little bit on Wikipedia, and there was a clip from Bill Gates when he did the Ice Bucket Challenge. Fourth was about a video that was made by the University of Wisconsin-Madison called Teach Me How to Bucky. It was based on an old song. Not old, I shouldn't say, but it was called Teach Me How to Dougie, but then they kind of did a parody for Madison about Teach Me How to Bucky. In this video, they intentionally wanted to get their message out far and wide. They wanted it to become viral and see my money. And then fifth and finally, there was a clip called like a school closing announcement. In this video, they kind of parody like other school closing announcements. They intentionally want to become viral because they're like singing and dancing around in this video and just having fun with it again. And it was meant to be kind of shared around. And then after doing these 5 different kind of sources and engaging with the material, I watched the lecture video that was posted for this day called Broadcasting via the Internet. This video talks about 12 different situations in which communications have been broadcast across the internet and have become viral in a sense. And this video again just kind of goes over some of the stuff I just talked about, like the Teach Me How to Bucky or just other kind of clips like that. And then there's some other bits where they talk about like other bits of communications, like how the Reading Rainbow was supposed to get a reboot, and to kind of become famous, they use the internet as a source of like crowdfunding to gather a wide amount of funds so that they could try and bring back this Reading Rainbow in kind of like an app format. It also talks a little more about the Ice Bucket Challenge. And then they talk about Cool Wand, which is a post that was made on Facebook by a college student. It's it's a picture of him at a Halloween party dressed up as like a Tinkerbell kind of fairy costume. And later, when he applied to be an intern at a bank, he did get the position, but then like once he was at work, some of his like fellow staff mates were kind of making fun of him and teasing him about it. And one of them made a comment about like nice wand because he had actually lied. Sorry, I misread this, but he lied about how he needed a couple days off from work around Halloween because he said that something came up at home when in reality he was just going out to party with friends, and that was why they were kind of teasing him about it because he had like lied to get off from work, and then they found him like dressed up as this fairy. The point of this reading, however, was to highlight the fact that online communication can be used for a few different reasons, and one of them, in this sense, was to potentially become viral or to gain a lot of like publicity and eyes, because this can be useful in a sense. Like for example, with the Reading Rainbow example, they wanted to become as public as possible because they wanted people to see them and hear their cause and kind of potentially consider donating money to them so that they might be able to start up this new app. But after actually going through the reading, we were given a PDF that talked about 12 different examples from the video, and then we had to go through and kind of decide if these messages were initially sent through the internet to become viral or if they were meant to be more personal and they were not intended to go viral. Obviously, because we're talking about them, all of them did end up going viral, but the original intention is what this PDF was hoping to have us answer. After going through all these readings and filling out this PDF, we were supposed to make a discussion post where we talked about one of the phenomena that was kind of one that stuck out to us from the video. Um, we were told to explain this phenomena and then talk about whether or not it was an intentional use of the internet to broadcast a message. And then we're supposed to explain why this went viral by referencing the three principles that research has shown to predict what content goes viral. These three principles were talked about back in the original lecture video. Professor Gernsbacher talked about them and explained them. The three principles were emotional aspect, point of contact, and there must have been an element of surprise. So, for example, I talked about in my post how the Reading Rainbow wanted to go online and become viral to try and collect more funds. And I said that I thought it became viral because it followed all of the three principles that are necessary for going viral. So first, there was that emotional aspect. Reading Rainbow was originally like a piece of publicly programmed television that was on. This was around kind of the mid 80s to the mid 2000s. Eventually, it died off. The program went down and it was no longer live. But now, these people are kind of trying to get it back up again. LeVar Burton specifically was the one who put up the Kickstarter to receive funds. And they are kind of trying to rely on this feeling of like nostalgia and kind of this wholesome appeal is like what they're trying to push because they want to, provide a new way to kind of help educate children through online resources. And they're definitely kind of tapping into this feeling of like, oh, do you remember when you were a kid? Well, like we want to try and bring that back for these other kids. We want to be able to give them what you had when you were children, but money is what we need. And so kind of tugging at the heartstrings there to create that emotional aspect. There's also the second point, which talks about the point of connection. So, or the point of contact, it's also referred to. Reading Rainbow, obviously, because it had kind of an existence prior to its Kickstarter campaign, there were many who were already familiar with it. So spreading word of it was not very difficult because there were many who were kind of familiar with the operation and kind of understood what it was about in terms of that appeal to engaging and educating young children. And then finally, the element of surprise must have been there because Reading Rainbow had already been down for about at least a decade by the time they kind of try to revive it. So I'm sure there was definitely a feeling of kind of shock around like, oh, this thing from my childhood that, I thought was kind of done, that was no more, is suddenly back around and it's potentially making a return. That must have been kind of a big deal for many people who watched this program as a child. I never really watched it or engaged with it, so I can't say personally what that was like, but I know that for many it must have been kind of a welcome return to see this sort of pop up back in their lives, even if it wasn't necessarily for them, but rather it was for these, this new generation of children. And then finally, I would say that this post was definitely intended to become viral just because, that's how kind of crowdfunding works. It's a matter of getting your message in front of lots of people and then hoping that you sort of make your appeal to them and they agree that it's something that's worth paying for, and then they, chip in to help out, and you're all able to kind of make this thing together with the funds that pull from the group. This was the end of my assignment number 1 though, so it's time to move on. Assignment number 2 was an interesting one because right away we were given 4 different questions and we were told to pick one of them and to kind of read the associated articles and follow up on the question. The first question was, why are online news websites turning off anonymous comments on their news stories? The second question was, what is crowdfunding and how does it work? Question number 3, what is revenge porn and what laws pertain to it? And then question number 4, is our getting our news online what's making our country more politically polarized? I thought quite a few of these topics were interesting. I didn't actually know that they were kind of turning off anonymous comments, and I generally had an idea of crowdfunding, but I hadn't really tried it before or known anyone who'd worked with it too much, so it was kind of new to me. And then revenge porn is interesting, just kind of the implication of, it is a crime, and thinking about how it affects people in that sense is interesting, and the way the internet can be used to kind of do bad things to people intentionally, and how it, allows you to send messages in a very broad manner, kind of easily allows you to really hurt people in that sense. And then fourth, is our news, politically polarizing the country. That was interesting too, because I would kind of personally just think that, news has always been a little polarizing just because it is like a two-party system. But I figured diving more into that would be interesting too. Ultimately, I decided to dive into the crowdfunding question just because I did think it was interesting. So this meant watching 2 TED Talks, a YouTube video, and then also reading a journal. The first TED Talk was by Victoria Westcott, and the basic summary was that crowdfunding could be a tool that enables people to start their own big projects without necessarily needing to find loans or building up their own capital first, or asking other businesses to invest in them. Rather, it's just kind of a way for them to pull together some funding based on whether or not the quality of their idea stands on its own and whether or not people believe on them, rather than having to put on a suit and go somewhere and ask for money. And this can really be an effective way to get something new off the ground without having to go through the old methodology of being all formal about it, but instead just kind of having a good idea and letting it show. The next clip was a YouTube video from Salvador Brickman, and it also kind of talked about crowdfunding a bit more. It explained how it can happen in many ways, and it's not just about asking people for money. You can vary in how much money you ask for, what kind of group you're asking from. You got to think about your audience. If you're asking from middle-aged people or the elderly, or maybe not even not Americans in general, just kind of being thoughtful about where this money is coming from. And then thinking about what platforms you want to use too. Social media is everywhere, so kind of tapping into that is an important way of figuring out how to reach multiple people and really expanding your web and talking to as many people as possible. I always kind of just thought it was a matter of putting out a post and asking for money and then seeing it come in, but after going through this video, it kind of made more sense to me to think of it as more of an actual almost a job, being persistent and going out and kind of making posts and thinking about who you're talking to and whatnot. And then after this, there was another TED Talk from Anna Gunther, and she explained how crowdfunding, even though we do it through the internet, it is still very much a human-to-human kind of interaction. It's about creating a message that resonates with people. You have to know what people want. If you just go out and say, I have this and I want money, you're not going to do much to convince people to help you. You have to actually be proactive and be creative and talk to these people and answer their questions and help them to realize what it is they're funding and why it matters. You have to make people kind of want to help you almost. It's not enough to just give them the option to do it. People, like we said earlier, about how when it comes to becoming viral, you have to have that sort of emotional aspect. The same logic kind of applies to crowdfunding. If you want people to believe in your message and believe and place their dollars in you, then you have to be willing to go out and kind of make yourself known and be great, I guess. And then finally was the article from Barry Adams. He talked about how crowdfunding isn't just some theoretical thing that can be done, but it actually happens quite often and it can produce very real results. Businesses, a lot of times smaller businesses, have the option to do it if they need help opening or maybe opening a new location, or if they're going through a remodel. But there are definitely a lot of ways that it could be used to kind of help to sort of fill in the gaps. In this specific article, he talked about how Madison's own B-Side Records was potentially going to close down once the owner was actually injured in a bicycle incident, a crash. So he had to step out for a little bit, and it kind of looked like the record was going to close, or the store was going to close. But luckily, they were able to kind of bring in some old friends to help run the store for a bit, and they were able to do some crowdfunding to kind of keep the store afloat while the owner was out. So this was actually really cool to see because B-Side Records is just right over on State Street. I've actually been there a couple times myself, but I've seen them do good stuff there. So to think that, they're crowdfunding just right here, in town is super cool to see, because it kind of proves that it's not just some every now and then, once in a million thing that only happens for super massive projects, but it's also something that can happen at kind of a medium size level or just in a town area. No one outside of Madison probably has too much stake in the operations of this business, but even so, just by talking to people in Madison and kind of asking for donations, they were able to pull enough money together to get by on, which was really cool to see. So to kind of answer the big question of what is crowdfunding and how does it work, Basically, crowdfunding is it's kind of in the name. It's a matter of going out to a group of people and then figuring out how to convince them that they should donate to kind of your cause. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be donations either. It can be a matter of like, people who donate or give this much amount can expect to receive this back in due time. Like it's a matter of, if you help me now, I can help you later. Maybe that means you're one of the first people to step in the store, or maybe it means you get like a discount on purchases or things like that. But basically, just the idea that, a big group of people are kind of made aware of something that they could put their money into and then they do it. And then how does it work? Really, it's just a matter of communicating with people and kind of sharing your idea and then sort of giving people the opportunity to help you out. And then, just hoping that it works out. That was everything for assignment 2, though. Starting with assignment 3, we have 3 articles and 2 graphics. We have Ajayi's 2017 article, How to Keep Your College Admission Offer Start with Digital Literacy. O'Neill's 2013 article, Confronting the Myth of the Digital Native. Ramspot's 2014 article, Teaching Digital Identity. Onlineclass.org's graphic, Should I Post This? And then StaySafeOnline.org's 2017 infographic, Your Personal Information is Like Money, Value It. And basically what these articles and readings and graphics all have in common is that they all discuss how to clean up your social media accounts so that they appear more proper and formal, and why this is important to do. In our own kind of modern age, it's normal to post online things that you do with your friends and your family just to kind of like share your life with people. It's sort of like a feel-good thing and it's super normal. But sometimes we have bad habits of kind of posting things that maybe wouldn't look good if like if grandma saw them or if your employer saw them or something like that. So these articles and readings all just kind of send the message that these are the steps you could follow to kind of protect yourself, to make your account stay clean, to make it look good, and just make sure to be mindful about what your online presence looks like and what kind of a person you make yourself look like, because you want to be careful to make sure that you don't post things that would make you seem like someone who's kind of not admirable or maybe is not a good job candidate. Next, we were tasked with cleaning up either one of our social media accounts or our friends or family members. There was another set of articles to read that all talked about how to avoid getting fired by Facebook, or how like certain people have not been recruited because of what they posted, or like how often people are losing their jobs because of their posts. Just about like the general harms of not being careful online and not thinking about what you're posting. And after reading all of these, I decided to kind of update my Instagram page. I'm not a huge social media poster. Instagram is really the only place where I'll kind of put out my own content. But I figured that even so, it was still important to kind of keep the reins tight and keep it clean and make it look good. Just because, going to college means I'm hoping to join the workforce one day, and I want to make sure that what I have looks good to whoever's looking at it, and I don't want to set myself up for failure or potentially get myself in any trouble. And after reading all these articles, I realized like the potential scope of trouble that you could get into. It was greater than I originally thought. I'd heard the stories of people, getting hired and then losing their jobs because of what they post online, but I don't know. It's just scary to think that you could do all that work to land a job and then screw it up by posting something that maybe doesn't even really accurately reflect the kind of person you are, but it was just a matter of you were having fun and in the moment you did something you shouldn't have. But anywho, after doing all these readings, I decided to change up my Instagram and kind of clean it up a little bit. I made sure to remove some old posts that had pictures of my friends and I doing things that would kind of seem potentially inappropriate without the right context. It's just a matter of like maybe like the kind of location you're in, like in the kind of like clothes you're wearing, or maybe like what you're drinking. Like I know that it's like just good fun with my friends, but I could understand why maybe someone kind of looking in from the outside would maybe not like fully understand what's going on and might be concerned that it's like kind of questionable behavior. And there was one specific post that I made sure to take down as well that had pictures of me and my friend at a job of ours that we were working at. We were on break. It wasn't like much like of any real consequence. We were allowed to be on our phones, but I still didn't want employers to think that potentially like I was slacking or not working because I was on my phone instead of, doing my job. So I made sure to take those down, and I was kind of glad that the articles that I read made me think of that because I had never really thought of that before. But after I had read them, I realized that they could potentially come off as problematic, and I was kind of glad that I realized that it might be smart to take them down. So I did that. I didn't really need to change any settings. My account has always been set to private just because the only people I ever really want to actually see what I post are like my friends and my family. So I didn't have too much to look at. I did go through my settings and just kind of double check everything to make sure it was set how I liked. And it was all pretty good. I was happy with what it looked like. So I didn't feel any kind of a real need to actually go and shift any of that up. I was happy with how it looked. But I was also glad to take the second glance because I know sometimes settings change with updates or there are like new things introduced that you want to go back and change. So I just figured it was a good idea to go look at it all. And just like basing it off specific articles too, like the article written by Mr. Wells demonstrated how employers might negatively react to like kind of like not, I don't know, like postings that could be seen as potentially inappropriate even if they're not directly, and how this might affect like potential employees like myself and what the consequences could be. It did a good job of outlining like, if you do X, Y could happen, and it made me realize that I didn't want Y to happen, you know. So I figured I'd go back and kind of clean it up a little bit. And then there was another article from Hernandez which showed how current employees can get in trouble for having public accounts and inappropriate online presences. This is the article that made me want to go back and make sure that my settings were set such that my account was not public. Just because, I mean, if it is, then that's how you can get in trouble for potentially people looking at your account and seeing things they don't like. Whereas if it's set to private, the only people who could really see it are friends and family, and then the chances of any like potential employers or like other like coworkers seeing anything is very low, unless obviously someone is following you who also works with you. And then finally, there was an article from Germain that did reinforce my belief that your account should be set to private. This was another article that just kind of described why it makes sense to make sure that, if you're setting your stuff to private, then the people who are seeing it are realistically only people who you want to see it, and it's not going to go to any eyes who maybe would kind of judge you for your behavior in a way that's maybe unfair or could get you in trouble, just because it is important to kind of protect yourself. But anyhow, after making my discussion post where I talk about all those different things, I was officially done with assignment number 3. Assignment number 4 was an interesting one because we started off with a set of different readings from the Pew Research where they talk about their news platform fact sheet. Basically, it's just a fact sheet that shows kind of a bunch of different little bits of data about news consumption, sharing like what are the percentage of adults who get their news from, digital devices or radio or print or television, and it kind of changes based on the year, and it shows like what percentage of people use this platform often and what percent use it sometimes and 1% use it like never. But it just does a good job of kind of showing how consumption changes based on certain like demographics or like what kind of medium is being used to actually access the news. And then for the assignment, we were told to note the high percentage of U.S. adults who get at least some of their news via online, so like through a smartphone or tablet. We were also told to note the moderate percentage of adults who get their news from TV, the low percentage of adults who get their news from radio or print, and then the high preference for getting news online with digital devices, the moderate preference for getting news from TV, and the low preference for getting news via radio or print. I would say this tracks pretty well with what I would intuitively expect. It feels like nowadays people spend most of their time online, usually on their phones or on their laptops, so it makes sense that people would want to get their news there too. And I mean, print has been kind of a dying medium, as the internet and digital media has become more popular. Getting anything through like books or newspapers or things like that has become significantly less popular in my lifetime. Granted, I was never really alive at a time when the internet wasn't pretty popular, so it's kind of hard for me to compare it to past times, but I mean, I know just in my own life that it's not super common to hear about people reading like an actual newspaper. And then on this Pew Research sheet, we also took a look at how this kind of use of digital versus like physical like preference for media breaks down over different like demographics. So how men and women are different, and how people across different age groups or across like different races have different preferences. And generally, I would say like across uh like the genders, the preferences aren't that different. It looks like men have a little bit more of a preference for news websites or apps, whereas women are more likely to look at social media. And I mean, expectedly, younger people are more likely to look at social media. Kind of middle-aged people are more likely to look at news websites or apps, and then like the elderly, the especially elderly, are most likely to look at also news websites and apps. But I mean, it's a lot closer to being like lower or closer to sort of physical mediums than other groups, even if they do still use news websites the most. And then going across races as well, these results were decently comparable. There were a few unique instances though, like social media was really popular amongst Hispanic and Asian groups, but not as much as amongst whites. And then whites also didn't use podcasts very much, but Hispanics and Asians use them more often. So, I mean, just kind of unique little small differences like that are kind of interesting to think about on how they affect like different groups, because I mean, they do pull differently. They have different preferences and they have different past experiences for how they use these sources and kind of what they mean and where the information goes. It's just interesting to think about how it changes. And then, interestingly, we were actually tasked with finishing up our 5 day news diary. And I didn't talk about this previously because I kind of wanted to talk about it at the tail end here. But basically, starting on Monday and going into this day that we had made this post on, we were supposed to keep like a 5 day diary where we talked about different news that we had seen throughout the days, like with things that we had learned that we didn't previously know. And then we were supposed to share the source that it came from and actually talk about like whether we found that source online or if it was offline. And for my news, this was around kind of late September, early October. So I have news talking about how Scholastic is launching a streaming app. I talk about how Selena Gomez got married, Jane Goodall died around this time. But anywho, the point is that after collecting all my little bits of news, what I found was that 80% of what I had learned during that time and recorded had been from online sources, and 20% had been from offline sources. And this had kind of honestly surprised me a little bit. I would have expected like almost all of my news to have come from an online source, but the fact that even 20% came from an offline was kind of interesting, I would say, for me to see. That was more than I was expecting. This general pattern, though, of online kind of learning being more common than in person physical learning is definitely reflected in the Pew Research summary, where they show almost across the board that online news sources are more preferable and more commonly used than like physical sources or by like actually watching the news on television. And in like young groups aged 18 to 29, it was especially common for online sources to be the most like preferable way to get news, which reflected what I kind of worked with. It also found that people who were kind of getting a college education or already had one were more likely to prefer to use online learning sources, which also matched like my own identity. It was also pretty common for the people getting their news from Instagram to be women and young and getting a college education. And while I'm not a woman, I do identify with those other groups. And that's not to say that I use Instagram all the time for my news, but it is one of the more common places I get it. So overall, I would say that was a generally accurate source too. And just because women use it too, obviously doesn't mean that men don't use it, but it is more popular amongst women. So I wouldn't say that perfectly reflected me, but it was still pretty close. Then finally, I kind of made my discussion post where I talked about how these different kind of identifiers for me interacted with how I got my news and what kind of news it was. And I made sure to upload my journal with my 10 days of, or my 5 days of news to the discussion post for this assignment number 4. And then with that, I was done with assignment number 4. But moving on to assignment number 5, we were again meeting with our small chat groups for the week. Prior to this chat, we read an article by Silverman and Singervine from 2016 titled Most Americans Who See Fake News Believe It, new survey says. And the point of this article was kind of to realize the importance of being digitally literate in the 21st century. You know, as fake news becomes more common and we see it everywhere, it does become more important to protect yourself from these kind of things and be able to realize where it exists and how to fight it. And then secondly, to see why and how digitally literate other college students are, just like how generally well they could pick apart fake news and real news. We read Croft and Moore's 2017 article, Checking What Students Know About Checking the News. What they found in this article was that half of the students that had been okay, so they basically had a bunch of students sit down and they showed them all a bunch of examples of real and fake news, but they didn't tell them what was real and fake. What they found was that like at least half the time students were calling fake news accurate. They weren't able to realize that it was fake news. And I think that this is definitely becoming like more of a problem as the internet becomes more popular and like AI becomes more of a commonly used tool and people can kind of throw together different things to sort of create graphics and fake voices and fake videos. It becomes really important to be able to try and pick this stuff apart. Then we kind of had a few more readings after that were sort of about like literacy studies and kind of being able to sift through Google and not like always just relying on the first results that come through and being able to like protect yourself. For that one, that was interesting. They actually talked about like a takeout order that had been like faked almost or had like been kind of rerouted and how it created a lot of problems for the person trying to like buy food from a restaurant. And then from that literacy study that Stanford posted, we were actually expected to test ourselves by looking at the kind of different like little snippets of articles or tweets that have been posted or like headlines from news articles and try to determine if they were real or fake or not. This was actually pretty difficult. This isn't the first time I've looked at something like this in a class where they want us to try and figure out if we could see like what's real, what's fake. But I mean, just seeing it made it kind of really salient, the idea that it could be very difficult to tell these things apart in real time, even if we know, like we're being told that there's fake stuff and real stuff in front of us that we need to sit and look and think about it. Actually doing that and being able to pull it apart is not easy. And then we read a set of articles that explained several steps for improving digital literacy. There were about 5 here, but they all kind of talked about how, to help yourself spot fake news or to kind of how to react to fake news and how to make sure that we're not spreading fake news and that just a lot of stuff like that. But the idea that, kind of the enemy is everywhere almost in a sense. And you always have to be on your guard and look out for it and protect yourself and make sure you're not falling victim for easy traps like that. By the time we finally started our group chat, we first shared our reactionary image of a cat. It was the 9 images of the cat, so we picked which one we liked. This is one of my favorites because it's got a bunch of funny pictures of cats like crawling into the fridge and like sleeping on the couch and stuff. I like it. And then we just shared briefly about what we wanted our group projects to be like whether we chose to do a whole course or deep dive option, and then what presentation medium we wanted to work in and what kind of progress we made. So we all talked about how we wanted to do our different things. My 2 other group mates wanted to do deep dives on their content. I was the only one who decided to do like a podcast or like a whole course option. But then we talked about progress and it sounded pretty good. It sounded like everyone's just been doing some basic note taking on the first few minutes. Maybe looking a little bit into how to like work their medium, like how to put together a podcast or a presentation. So just kind of going off that. Going into the actual discussion portion, we talked about 3 reasons why college students need to be more digitally literate, based on the articles that we'd read above. And for our reasoning, we talked about how it's important to separate fake news from real news. It's a necessary skill when it comes to making informed decisions, and the skill is useful because fake news has become much more common recently, which makes being able to differentiate between like that real and that fake a lot more important, Fake news is always kind of like, it's something to be aware of because it's not going to help anyone in any way. It's almost something that is kind of like a piece of propaganda that the original poster is spreading, either to kind of make trouble or to like get laughs or just sort of just make things more difficult for other people. So like falling for fake news is always something you have to be aware of because it's always going to hurt you if you do it, or it's going to hurt someone else at the very least. And then thinking about informed decision making is important too. If you think about like the context of politics, there's a lot of fake news that circles around who says what or who does what or who supports what, and your vote is a very big deal. It's like your duty as a citizen to follow your politics and to think about what's being said and how it applies to your nation, and trying to do what you think is best, do what you think is right. And fake news can absolutely mess that up. So kind of being smart there. And then it is also important to think about fake news just because it does, as I said earlier, it's been kind of having like an uprise in popularity just because the tools to create it have become like more popular and more widespread and just more like easily accessible to anyone, and people are accessing it and making more fake news, and that's something to be worried about. Next, after that, we talked about 20 steps that college kids can take to improve their digital literacy. I'm going to rapid fire through these really quick because there's some good ones here, but there's a lot, so I'm just going to quick rumble through them here. All right, going through all 20, we said, first, question the source of the claims, reverse search photos, look past the order of search results, look at the URL on the website to see if it's reliable, inspect the dates, read laterally, meaning open new tabs to research, talk to peers for a broader perspective, be skeptical of headlines, try to determine if the news is actually just trying to sell you something, try not to share news before confirming its validity, check the supporting sources, try to find multiple sources that confirm the information, recognize your confirmation bias, background search on the author, look for arguments for and against the main point, learn to spot when something is satire, check comments for the post, think about more than just what is taught in school. Oftentimes the education given to support online safety is not enough. Compare what is cited within the article, and then read the About Us section of the article. This was our set of points that we came up with, and I thought we did a pretty decent job. I know most of these are definitely things that I already do to kind of compare research and compare articles and just fact check stuff because they do work pretty well. It can be a good way to compare data and make sure that everything is how it should be. But anyways, this was the end of our group meet, so we kind of set up our responsibilities for next time, or for this meet, I should say, about who would do the PDF and who would summarize the meet and whatnot. And we picked the time to meet next time, but then we disbanded. This was the end of assignment number 5. Going into assignment number 6, right away, we had our course review sheet. So starting off, I just went back and did all the old weeks. But then going into the unit 5 here, I talked about how first there was a section where we had to illustrate how the internet can amplify communication by listing 4 instances from the lecture video of this week when internet-based mass communication was intended to go viral. So I talked about the Teach Me How to Bucky moment, the Reading Rainbow app, the Help Wanted section, and the Ice Bucket Challenge. And then talking about a time when interpersonal communication on the internet was not intended to go viral, I talked about the Charlie Bit My Finger moment, the Cool Wand post, the matter of the fair trade organic bananas, and the Text from My Ex segment on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And then just working on the term project for this week, I made sure to kind of catch up more on my journaling. I think at this point I was around done with units 2, maybe 3. But yeah, just kind of trying to catch up to where I was. I didn't want to try and sit down to do like the first 4 units in like just 2 sittings or whatever. I wanted to make sure that I actually took the time to do a good job and make it look nice. So I remembered to kind of go through and just work away at it, 1 week at a time. And then I kind of took a screenshot of the work I did there on my journaling. And then I put that together with a 200-word post where I talked about what project I've chosen, what medium I've chosen, and then what kind of work I've done so far. And then I took that kind of summary post, that screenshot, and I put that together with my course review sheet, and I submitted that for the week. So that was unit 5, all done.